Okay, so you're very welcome to week 3 of the Going Deeper course. Nice to see you all here again. So just to give a sense of what we'll be doing this morning, let me just share my screen again. So what we will be doing, hopefully you can see that, it's not a problem if you can't. We're going to have a review of last week in the home practice. As we always do. In a few minutes, we'll go into the smaller groups. This week, we're going to be looking a bit more deeply at what we covered on the introductory course, which is namely what we do when we get distracted in meditation, so what we call the hindrances. So when we look at the hindrances in the beginner's course, it's the first time you're seeing it. So by now, hopefully, you'll have a bit more familiarity with them, and in recognizing them in particular. And so we're going to just look at them again in a bit more detail and how to work with that. Working in terms of general strategies and more specific strategies, or more specific antidotes, which we didn't have time to go into on the beginner's course. You might have read about them in the notes, but we're going to go into them anyway, a bit more detail. We'll do a mindfulness of breathing, sit. And then in the second half, what we'll look at, it'll be a bit shorter than the first half. It's not quite a half really, but we'll be looking at what's called dhyana, or absorption, and we'll be looking at moving from distraction to what we call access concentration to full absorption. Yeah, and I don't have it there, but we'll be looking at the home practice for the coming week as well. So just to remind you of what we did last week, we had a review of home practice introductions. We looked at metta bhavana last week. So hopefully you were either here last week or you got to have a look at the video. So we looked at what metta is. How do we find the metta bhavana? How do we get on with the metta bhavana and so on? We had some Q&As around that. We looked at some difficulties people have with metta. So difficulties like thinking that it should feel a certain way, or you should be having a certain type of experience, or stories that you might have like, I don't have any metta to give, things like that. And really one of the things I was emphasizing is that when there is difficulties in metta, in a way you respond with metta to that, and you take that in with metta, and you really just try and make acceptance of difficulty the practice, in a way, the mettaful practice. And the other thing I was pointing out is that metta really boils down to really taking the person in and being in touch with your own heart's response. And it's a simple desire for them to be well. It doesn't have to be anything cosmic or anything like that. And we looked at creating the conditions for metta, activity in terms of the phrases, receptivity to the person, to your heart. What else do we look at? It arises out of gratitude and so on. So we looked at all that, and it arises out of connection and that. So we looked at all that, and then we did some home practice, or we gave you some homework rather. So the home practice from last week was to, let me just move something, commit random acts of kindness. So I was really encouraging you to just be kind, try and find ways to be generous and to be kind in your each and every day. I was encouraging you to enjoy beauty. So beauty is very much a state of mind which is mettaful. And if you can try and experience beauty throughout your day, we were talking about the galleries last week and so on, or whatever form beauty takes for you. If you can really appreciate beauty in your day, you'll be much more tuned into metta when you sit in meditation, and indeed off the cushion as well. I was telling you to look for connection. And one of the best ways of looking for connection is to become a better listener. So really try and practice listening to someone else when you're in conversation with them, not just waiting for them to say their piece so you can say yours. Express yourself more to your friends. Maybe you want to just try for deeper connection. And maybe rejoice in your friends. Tell them or tell other people what you really admire and like about them. And keep using your meditation journal. So I want you to record how you get on with this. There's a lot of homework there. I wasn't expecting you to do all that, but certainly I hope you've done, or at least tried to do some of that, yeah? So that's the home practice for the week. Yeah, so and good morning to Camille and Derek, who's just joined us. So what we'll do in a few moments is we'll go into the smaller groups. But before we do that, why don't we just do a short meditation just to arrive? So why don't we set up just for 3 minutes or so, 3 or 4 minutes, just in whatever position works for you. Just settling into being seated here. So firstly, just taking in a sense of the room and the sounds we can hear. A sense of our surroundings. The floor we're in contact with, the chair we're in contact with. Becoming aware of our feet and legs in contact with the floor, the cushion, the chair. Becoming aware of the sitting bones supporting our weight. Becoming aware of our stomach, our abdomen area. Our back, our spine, our shoulders. Our arms and hands. Our face. And resting in the heart center then, in the chest. Noticing the rise and fall of the rib cage as we breathe in and as we breathe out. And then letting go of the breath and broadening out once more, taking in the room around us, the sounds we can hear, the people around us in the world. And in your own time then, bringing the practice to a close, opening your eyes, reintroducing movement. Okay, so in a moment then Kevin will send you to the groups. So just to remind you again of the home practice there on the screen, how did you get on at random acts of kindness, enjoying beauty, becoming a better listener, looking for connection, expressing yourself to your friends, doing more metta bhavana, I haven't said that, but it's there as well, rejoicing in your friends and your meditation journal. Okay, Kevin, so if you could send people to their groups, that would be great. You should have an invitation come up on your screen now. In 1 minute. Okay, you're all very welcome back into the group. I think everyone's back now. Is that right, Cliff? Yeah, great. Okay, so you're all very welcome back into the group. Hopefully your audio is reconnected now. But maybe if you can, maybe you could write into the comments or into the chat box just how you got on during your week a little bit, or anything from the group, or any questions you have. Great, Sam had a good session. Thanks for that. Good practice this week from someone else. Lovely discussion and chat. They're really nice, these groups, I have to say. And it's nice to, I feel like sometimes you can learn as much from other people who are learning with you. Oh, I just need to mute everyone. Hang on a second. Okay, good. Yeah, so you can sometimes learn as much from other people as you can from, well, me sitting here when you hear people. Lovely discussion. Thanks. Yeah, nice to share your week. Someone is saying they're experiencing stiffness in their neck after the longer sits, despite stretches beforehand. If there's any problems in your neck and your hands or your shoulders, I would really recommend supporting your arms a little higher and a little better. So put more thought into how you support your hands, because usually with neck and shoulder stuff, it is your hands not being supported well enough. Otherwise, it might be, you might just have to keep checking into your posture and just checking you're not sitting crookedly, or, you know, your spine is upright. Tuck your chin slightly down, so you lengthen the back of your neck, and lift the crown of your head to the ceiling, that kind of thing. I'm not sure what else, short of having you in front of me where I can look at you, I'm not sure what else I can say about that if your neck is sore. But you could always send a message to me privately if you want it. That's great, Derek. So Derek was kind to his flatmate. A few long, friendly conversations with a friend he'd fallen out with. Great. Marion enjoyed the feedback from other people. We both did a lot of our practice and learned about our behaviours and how to be different from Bernie. Marion really enjoyed chatting to the ladies in our group. Sam enjoyed sharing. Ashlyn, when I was doing the metta for the difficult person, it felt like I was being scabby with my metta, like I was taking it away from others, like there was an infinite amount or scarcity of well-being or metta. Yeah, so metta isn't a, it's not a zero-sum game. So you know, if you do metta for one person, it doesn't mean you have less metta for another person. In fact, we talk about it in Buddhism as being a spiral path. So the more metta you have, the more metta you'll go on to cultivate again in the next moment. So metta is something that increases. And in fact, metta is called one of the immeasurables in Buddhism. So it's called an immeasurable because there's no limit to how much of it you can cultivate. So Ashlyn, if you're experiencing what you talked about there, that's just it might just be a story you're telling yourself that you don't need to hold, you know. Roshan enjoyed it. Anne Connolly, sorry, enjoyed it. Jenissa said thanks. So lots of appreciation for the groups. Emer saying, I seem to go from quite connected to really distracted. Can't find the middle ground. Yeah, but at least you're getting quite connected at times, Emer. And we'll look at that a bit more in the next bit about working with being really distracted. But maybe that's just how it is for now. And it's, you know, we're all going to get distracted, and sometimes there's nothing you can do about being distracted, I have to say. Katrina all agreed that we were feeling calmer despite getting distracted in meditation. That's okay. Yeah. Sylvia's a lot of people saying about how they enjoyed the group. Ashlyn said I was particularly scabby with the difficult person. Yeah, that would be the one you would be, isn't it? One would be, yeah. I found the tips from last week's class very helpful. Gave myself permission to find it difficult or not to fully feel the metta. I think that's a really good one, Helena. So Helena's saying that she found it really helped to give herself permission to find things difficult. So I think that's quite profound, actually. So it's fine to find meditation difficult. It's fine to find your mental states difficult. It's fine to find people difficult. And it's only by accepting that we can then work to improve that and work and bring metta to that. So it's completely normal to find these things difficult. And she also gave herself permission not to feel full of metta. So again, I think we feel like we should be overflowing of metta for everyone, but that's just not how it is a lot of the time. So that's a really good insight, Helena. Thank you for that. For self, your suggestion of starting with the body help, but still finding it a difficult part. So that's Mike. Yeah, Mike. I mean, again, it might be difficult for a while, but just keep doing it, and it'll still have an effect on you. You know, I'm really confident that if you just keep doing it, it will have the effect, and it probably is already having an effect on you. If you're finding Metta Bhavana difficult, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're doing it wrong. Yeah, it just means that you're finding it difficult. I don't mean to be glib or anything, but that's just how it is, you know. So Adrian's asking, what if you can't feel metta for the difficult person? I feel like I'm faking it till I make it for now, or just noticing the disconnection and trying to bring it in. Well, maybe sometimes that's what you have to stay with for a little time, you know, noticing the disconnection and seeing how that feels, and just trying to, you know, see if there's something you can do about that disconnection. Maybe that's all you can do for now. Maybe all you can do for now is forgive them, or just try not to hate them, you know. Or try not to feel aggrieved, or try to get out of the stories you tell yourself about them. So maybe that's all you can do. And again, you know, the difficult person is difficult. So it's okay to find them difficult, you know. I mean, in terms of faking it till you make it, don't be forcing something out. Just try and maybe get to a feeling of this person's a human being, just like I'm a human being, and I'm going to wish them well as much as I can. Yeah. Yeah, Ashley, that's good. Breathing in, breathing out, and saying and counting. Oh yeah, so breathing in and saying the word in, and breathing out and saying the word out, and then counting. Probably, Ashley, just do one or the other. Maybe saying the word and counting is probably a bit too much. You could try just doing one or the others. Really noticing the beauty. That's great, Anne. A flock of sheep invading your back garden, seeing the beauty in their antics. Great. Do people have any ideas for random acts of kindness? Make a person a cup of tea, take them in, you know, buy them something nice, give them pizza, Derek says. Picking up plastic off the beach, yeah. Pay for coffee. Oh, you can pay forward in shops. Yeah, that's a nice thing to do. Okay, so they're all good comments. I mean, in a way, some of those questions we could spend the whole morning on. But let's move on now. Let's move on. So wanted to explore a bit more about the hindrances, as I've said earlier. So we've used plenty of images before in our course for how the mind is and how the mind works. And often it's easier to use an image to talk about the mind, because the mind is very hard to pin down. And the Buddha said sometimes that the mind is like water. So water is a really good image for the mind. Water is constantly moving, it's constantly flowing. It has subtle currents in it. It has greater depths at times in it. It's constantly changing. Water, it takes on, you know, if you look at a river, it takes on the shape of the bank around it, and our minds tend to take on the shape of what's in our surroundings a lot of the time. Water can get very cold, and it freezes and turns very solid. Our minds, you know, when we're deprived of contact and connection, we can get very cold and isolated and emotionally frigid. If water is very hot, it can turn into steam. And when we get very irritated or worked up about things, you know, we talk about letting off steam, don't we? So your mind can become agitated and turbulent like boiling water. So these images are really useful. And the Buddha used 5 images for the different hindrances that we have, the 5 different hindrances. So it might be worth asking yourself in meditation sometimes, if my mind was like water, what would it be like right now? Yeah, if my mind was like water, what would my mind be like right now? So to come on to the hindrances a little bit more, and then we'll link them to what I've just said about water. Just to remind you of what the hindrances are. Hopefully you all know these off by heart by now, because I was urging you on the beginner's course to learn them off by heart. So there's sense desire, which is where you're preoccupied with pleasant experience, usually food, sex, or sleep traditionally, but it can be daydreaming about winning the lottery. It can be about your holidays. It can be pleasurable planning of your day. Ill will is where you're preoccupied with something unpleasant, like I wish that garbage truck that just went past a few minutes ago wasn't there because it's distracting me, or the irritable person, or that conversation you had earlier in the day. There's restlessness and anxiety. So this is physical restlessness, where you can't sit still, sometimes because you don't really want to go into your experience. Or anxiety, which is the more emotional side of things, which probably needs no explanation, just worrying. Worry and flurry, this is sometimes called. You have sloth and torpor. So this is a physical lack of energy. Emotional and mental lack of energy is torpor. So often because maybe there's a lot of conflict going on internally, or there's one part of you wants to do this and another part of you wants to do that, or maybe there's a lot going on in your life and you're just absorbing it emotionally. And then doubt and indecision, where you can't commit to anything. You're kind of you're sitting on the fence, not in an honest way, but more in the sense that you prevaricate about everything, so you don't have to commit to anything. Yeah, you prevaricate about everything, so you don't have to commit to anything. So you keep yourself on the fence, because that way you don't have to engage with your deeper mind. So these are the 5 hindrances, which I presume you all recognize, or at least recognize the ones that you particularly do. My one that I tend to do is sense desire, to be honest, mainly sense desire. The Buddha gave these 5 images. So these are the 5 hindrances. And he gave 5 water images, one for each of them. So he said the first one, sense desire, is like water mixed with dye. So you have your clear, pure mind just flowing. And then when you bring in sense desire, it's like pouring in colored dyes into the water. So the water takes on all these bright colors and so on. And the colors can be swirly and kind of interesting and fascinating, but actually they really just take away from the clear water of our minds. They take away from the clarity of our minds. And it's important with sense desire to stop pouring the food dyes in, or whatever kind of dyes they are, and allow the water to run clear. So in a way, with sense desire, one of the main things we have to do is stop being so fascinated by the different colors of it, yeah? And remember that what we're really trying for is the pure, clear water of our minds to emerge. And Buddhism is very optimistic about the mind. It says that if we stop pouring things into the ecosystem of our minds, like sense desire or any of the other ones, given enough time, it'll just run clear again. The mind naturally will run clear, will run pure, will run towards clarity, yeah? So we're trying to be less preoccupied with the food dyes, trying to let the mind run clear. So that's the first image for sense desire. So maybe if you do sense desire, that image will have a resonance for you. The next image, I've kind of touched on this already, but ill will is like water heated to a boil. So when we're in ill will, particularly like very strong ill will, murderous rage, you could say, our minds are boiling, yeah? And in a way, it can feel like there's a lot of passion and energy in that. But actually, it is just as obscuring, and actually it's quite like hot water, boiling water. It's very dangerous, actually, it can really scald you or others. So what we're trying to do here is let go, stop adding heat to the mind. I think that's the main thing we need to do with ill will, is we need to stop adding heat to the mind. The heat is where we dwell upon and consciously or unconsciously cultivate ill will, cultivate a sense of grievance, cultivate a sense of hatred. And in a way, when you're doing that, you're just adding more flames to the pot or to the water, to mix the metaphors a little bit in terms of a stream and a pot. But so we're trying to let the mind come off the boil and clarify again, yeah? Restlessness and anxiety is like water that's overgrown with algae. So if you ever see a stream that's just covered in kind of the green algae on the top, so it's very hard really to do much with that water, we can't see through the algae. Just like when we're in a state of anxiety, I think one of the main things we need to do is see through the anxiety. We're just being a story on the surface of our minds, maybe. I mean, it's not quite on the surface. It probably goes, there's an emotional depth to it. But we have to work with kind of pushing or digging away or seeing through the algae to see the clarity of our minds again. And maybe one of the things we need to do is just not engage with the story of the algae as well, of the anxiety. So sloth and torpor Oh, I'm sorry. I'm after getting those mixed up. I'm sorry. I mean, the algae metaphor actually worked for me, but actually, the restlessness and anxiety is actually like water stirred up by wind. Actually, I'm sorry. I mean, I thought the algae metaphor worked actually, but so restlessness and anxiety is like water stirred up by wind. My apologies. I got those reversed. So let's go with that again. So take two. So restlessness and anxiety. Yeah, our minds are can be quite whipped up actually as well. So you know what we need to do with restlessness, I think this works better for restlessness actually. So usually when we're in a state of restlessness, what we need to do is just to sit, not let ourselves be blown around by the winds of our mind. Yeah. So with restlessness and anxiety, I think we still, everything I've said is true in terms of trying to see through the story, but using the metaphor of the wind, then you know, it is quite turbulent at times. So we need to find a sense of calmness as well. So the antidote to restlessness and anxiety is a sense of peace and calmness. We'll come on to that in a few minutes. And then sloth and torpor, maybe we need to trudge through it a bit. We need to dig it up, you know. It's sloth and torpor is where your mind feels very sludgy, you know. The water feels very dank. And maybe we just need to get a shovel out and get some energy going and clear away, just really strongly engage again with the practice. So apologies for getting them mixed up. Hopefully that doesn't confuse you. And then the last one is, it's a bit similar to sloth and torpor, but doubt and indecision is kind of dirty, muddy water. And in a way, this is where we need to perhaps pour in some fresh water, pour in some fresh inspiration. In India, in Indian stories, you know, they're quite concerned about clear water in India because water is so precious at times of the year. There's a lovely story of a jewel that's a water purifying jewel. And when you touch the jewel to the water, to muddy water, the water just clears and becomes beautiful, clear water. So I think, and in Buddhism, the jewel represents commitment. So when we touch our practice, when we touch our minds, we're just committing to doing it. The water will magically clear. Yeah. So we need to just commit to the practice in order to clear that muddy and dirty water. Or another way of looking at that metaphor is we need to pour in some new inspiration to get that water going again, to get the clear water going again. Okay, so sense desire, water mixed with dye. Ill will, water heated to a boil. Restlessness and anxiety, where our minds are stirred up by a wind, the winds of our stories, you could say. Sloth and torpor, where our minds are overgrown with algae. And doubt and indecision, muddy and dirty water. Okay. And Mike shares on the chat that, yeah, you can still the water by stop throwing in pebbles. So the stories that we have are probably like pebbles in terms of our anxieties and so on. Okay, so maybe there's one particular hindrance that you do. Usually we tend to focus on one or two. So it might be that you want to dwell on a particular image there for your mind. So in terms of the general antidotes that I mentioned in the course, I won't spend very long on these because I want to spend a bit of time on a bit later. So firstly, turn towards it with kindness. So accept that you're doing it. Feel it in your body. Name it. So this is why you need to know them so you can name them. Acknowledge them. So I am doing sense desire here. I am doing anxiety. So that can be, you don't always have to do that. It's part of naming it. You're naming and saying and allowing it. Acknowledging it means you're kind of letting yourself feel the naming, you could say. You're saying, at an emotional level, yeah, I am doing this. I have to take responsibility for this, you know. With a lot of sense desire, we don't really want to realize we're doing sense desire. A lot of the time with anxiety, it can just be brilliant to say, this is anxiety, this is just a story, yeah? And let it go if you can. Okay, so I've mentioned all those last time, so I'm not going to focus on them too much. What I do want to focus on is, before we do some meditation, is the more specific antidotes, yeah? So these are more specific things we can do if none of those other things work. So the first thing is to consider the consequences. So what are the consequences of me sitting here for 20, 30, 40 minutes just daydreaming about my holiday? Well, the consequences are that I'll have wasted a meditation sit and I won't feel as good afterwards. Yeah. What are the consequences of dwelling upon my grievance with that person? well, I'll just end up being a slightly unhappier person. I'll just end up being a person who tends to hate more. And that is the truth. If you dwell upon hate, you will be a person who hates more, you know? What are the consequences of getting lost in this story? What are the consequences of getting intoxicated with this thought? You know, so they're the kind of things that are actually quite useful for some of the hindrances in particular. I mean, with sloth and torpor, it's not going to work really. You know, you can't consider the consequences of just being out of it because you're not going to be able to. But for other hindrances, it can work quite well. Yeah. The next one is to cultivate the opposite. So I'm going to come back to that. Well, maybe we'll just look at those in a minute. Okay. Maybe we'll look at those now. Okay. So cultivating the opposite. So we have the 5 hindrances. So if you're in a state of sense desire, cultivate the opposite, which would be something like contentment. So you try and be happy with what you have here and now. So if a state of sense desire, by definition nearly, is wanting to be somewhere else that's pleasurable. So what you're trying to do is instead be content with just being here with the breath. Yeah. And by somewhere else, I mean either physically or emotionally or mentally, you know. Ill will, the antidote might be metta. So you do metta for the person if you find yourself in a state of ill will, or you see if you can enjoy the practice. It's very hard to be annoyed and enjoy things, healthily enjoy things at the same time. I mean, you might enjoy ill will, but it's not really that enjoyable actually when you look at it. So trying to cultivate metta. The opposite of restlessness and anxiety is peace or calm. So you're trying to cultivate those. So look for peace in your body in particular. Look for a sense of calmness in your body in particular, yeah? The opposite of sloth and torpor is a sense of energy, yeah? Is a sense of energy. So, you know, just trying to bring more activity and energy to your practice. And there's nothing wrong with being very active in meditation when you really have to work strongly with sloth and torpor. And then the opposite of doubt and indecision is commitment. Just deciding I'm just going to really commit to this right now, and I can question it afterwards. Yeah. So they're the opposites. I'll send all those in the notes this week. But you might again, if you have one particular hindrance you do, maybe you just want to note the opposites for the sit that we're going to do in a few minutes. Yeah. So then to come back to the opposite. So then the next one is to cultivate a sky-like mind. So Buddhism sees the mind as a clear blue sky, and any thoughts and emotions that arise within the clear blue sky. And so if you have a story about that you're getting anxious about, well, you kind of step back into the clear blue sky, emotionally speaking, and you let it play out, watching it, but not being lost in it. Okay, so that's what this is talking about, being able to watch things but not being lost in them. Yeah. So if you have to identify with anything, don't identify with your thoughts or emotions. Identify with the clear blue sky, which is the full breath of your mind. And it might not work on a day like this today in Ireland, but you know, it's a traditional Buddhist practice in Tibet to go out and look at the sky, the blue sky, the depths of the blue sky, which will be very deep indeed in Tibet and India at times of the year. And just realize your mind is vast like that. And actually thoughts are just something very small within that. So I think that works very well for anxiety, actually, if you can do that. Yeah. Less well for some of the other ones. So suppression is the next one, or another way of putting it is just saying no. So you're just saying no to the, I'm just not going to think about my holidays right now. I'm just not going to get into a story about that person right now. I'm going to say no and come back to the practice. And this will work with relatively minor or weaker hindrances. It won't work with furious ill will. It won't work with doubt and indecision. That's very, very strong. It won't work with very strong hindrances, but it's very useful for low level. It's very useful for low level hindrances. Yeah. Surprisingly so. It's not repression where you're unconsciously burying stuff in your mind. It's more that you're saying, I'm just not going to do that now. Yeah. Then the last one is, even if the meditation's a real challenging and a write-off, at least you retain the bigger perspective that there's overall sense of progress, that you're still making progress, that it'll still have an effect. In a way, this is kind of taking solace in the bigger perspective is sometimes how it's put, or it's put more traditionally, going for refuge. Yeah. So you're taking solace in the bigger picture. So they're this more specific antidotes. I'd really encourage you this week to read about them in the notes. because there's a lot. They're really, really useful. They're really, really useful. And you might want to focus on one in particular, yeah, in the coming set. Okay. Do our clouds make meditation? Yeah, it's probably clouds make the. Anyways, yes, thanks, Tom. Okay, so let's see. Is there anything else I need to say before we do the sit? No. Okay, so why don't we set ourselves up then for a 30-minute period of meditation. So do what you need to do now to be comfortable, and I'll lead us into, and very likely lead into sit, a period of mindfulness of breathing. Okay, so settling into our postures, closing our eyes when we're ready. And then tuning in again to the foundations of mindfulness, applying the 4 mindfulnesses. So beginning with the body, really tuning into maybe firstly the contact with the floor, with the cushions, with the chair. Our sitting bones. Our stomach and abdomen. And wherever else you want to move your awareness to in the body. How at ease are we in our body? Is it a comfortable or uncomfortable experience sitting here? Just noticing that. Or is it somewhat neutral? And tuning into our minds and hearts. So if our emotions were like water, what kind of water would they be at the moment? Or if they were like weather, if that's easier, what kind of weather would they be? What's the flow of our emotions like? Noticing emotions arising and passing away in the clear blue sky of our mind. And thoughts arising and passing away in the clear blue sky of our mind. And now allowing the breath to emerge within all this. The breath at its own pace. And connecting with our intention now to stay engaged with the breath in the practice. And resolving that if we wander off into a hindrance, we will work with it creatively, recognizing it, naming it, using some of the antidotes, like cultivating the opposite, or considering the consequences, or sky-like mind. The main thing is really to work with them. Don't try and remember everything we've just talked about. The mindfulness of breathing. And in the first stage, we're mindful of the breath with a count after the out breath. And if we're distracted, working creatively with that. If we're enjoying the sit, just letting go a bit more into that enjoyment. Now in the second stage, we're mindful of the breath with the count before the in-breath. So noticing where your mind is, responding appropriately, working with it if you've wandered off. Again, just noticing where your mind is and responding appropriately. And now in the third stage, we're simply aware of the breath and each aspect of the breath, the rise and fall of the breath. So noticing if we've wandered off, and just seeing if we can come back and be content with the simplicity of the breath. Each breath in, each breath out. And again, noticing where our minds are and staying engaged with the practice. Now in the fourth stage, we begin by noticing where we can first feel the breath enter the body. And then, as we breathe in and as we breathe out, we notice the sensations at this point. And if you wander off, just coming back again and committing to the practice or using the antidotes as necessary. So, where is our mind? What are we doing? Are we with the meditation or have we wandered off? Now letting go of all effort, letting go of any attempt to do anything. We spend a couple of minutes just sitting. So in your own time, then starting to broaden out your attention once more, taking in the room around you, the sounds you can hear, reintroducing movement. And coming out fully in your own time. Okay, so what we'll do now is we'll just take a short break for 5 minutes, just for a comfort break. So let's be back here in 5 minutes' time. By my clock, that's 3 minutes to 12, because we do have a bit more stuff to get through. So 5 minutes' time, we'll see you back here ready to go. Okay, and if you have any questions in the meantime, you can put them in the chat box, and we'll hopefully get back to them when we'll get on to them when I get back. Okay. Okay, so why don't we kick off again? So just one or two questions. One person was asking, they're saying they're a little unclear on doubt and indecision. Is it in relation to the practice, whether or not to meditate? It could be that. It could be at any stage. So it could be whether or not you should meditate. It should be whether or not you should pick that person. It should be whether or not you're doing it right. It's anything that you use to not really fully engage with the practice. So it can be off the cushion, it can be off the cushion. It can be on the cushion, it can be off the cushion, it can be at any stage. It's any kind of excuse you use to not more deeply engage, really. Yeah. Hilda says, I realize that when I get distracted with sense desire, I continue the breathing with my daydream. I've merged the two. Any tips on how to untangle them? Well, try and shift more of your awareness onto the breath, Hilda. And if it's really impossible to untangle them, let them both be, but try and shift more and more of your energy onto the breath. And with sense desire, in the notes this week, there's more appendices about how to go deeper into them. But with sense desire, another way you can work is try and find more pleasure in the breath, in just being here in the body, breathing. Sense desire is a preoccupation with pleasure. So you're looking for pleasure elsewhere. Try and find pleasure in the breath and a bit more pleasure in the breath, and just try and see if let go into the enjoyment of the simplicity of the breath. Yeah. Okay, let's keep going, and you can bring in more questions if you wish. Before we start, let me just share my screen. So just to remind you that all our events are online on dublinbuddhistcentre.org/online. I wanted to flag one particular upcoming event that we're very excited about, and I'll send you more details in the chat box, but we have a week-long online retreat at the start of August, so Sunday the 2nd to Sunday the 9th of August. So getting on retreat is like rocket fuel for your meditation practice. But unfortunately, we can't go away on retreat at the moment because we're in lockdown, so to speak, or, well, we have social distancing and so on. So we're not in a position to run in-person retreats, but this is a really great opportunity to get on retreat anyway in your normal week. So, I mean, some people might be taking the whole week off work and just being on the retreat, but if you still have to work or, you know, raise your kids and things like that, you come to whatever you can. And every morning, for example, there's meditations. In the afternoon, mid-morning, there'll be something, afternoon, there'll be something, and evening, there'll be something. All online. So we're really excited about it. I hope you can book on for it. I'll send you the link, or you can see it on that website on that link if you want. And it will be exploring Buddhism and meditation. So it'll be a great way to look at that. Great. And then in terms of, just to remind you again that the course is done completely free. So if you're in a position to donate, we'd really love if you can donate to help support the centre and help us keep going. And we're almost entirely dependent upon donations at the moment. I've also included the second link there. Kevin's included in the chat just now, the paypal.me, which is really quick. You can donate via PayPal within, takes you about 30 seconds, I think, as well. So if you want to try that out, do try that. And all donations are very much appreciated. And if you're not in a position to donate, that's fine. But do think about it if you can. Okay, so the last thing that I wanted to talk about before looking at the home practice, I wanted to talk about then, as I mentioned before on the beginner's course, meditation isn't just about distraction. So we can enter into states of absorption, which we call dhyanas in meditation. That's the old Buddhist word from dhyanas, or absorptions basically. And this is where the hindrances are no longer there. Okay, it might seem crazy to think that there's just no sense desire, there's no ill will, there's no sloth and torpor, there's no restlessness and anxiety, there's no doubt and indecision. You're just fully present with the breath. In fact, you're so absorbed in the breath that it said you can't tell where you begin and the breath ends, or the breath ends and you begin. So you're just fully at one with the breath. And I have little doubt that we've all probably experienced that to some degree at times, and on this course, in our meditation already, some moment where, even if it's just for a single breath or a single moment, where you just feel in the breath, not looking at the breath, yeah, or in metta and not you doing metta necessarily, just happens, yeah. So these are really good states to cultivate and to try and be in, and they're marked by freedom from conflict internally, lightness, clarity, bliss, enjoyment, pleasure, purification of our energies, very much straightforwardness, really into it, all those kinds of qualities. And I don't have time to go into the different dhyanas that we have described in the Buddhist tradition. So there's 8 different dhyanas mainly described. The first one I'll just talk about is like the Buddha gives another set of images for these dhyanas. And he says the first one is like where you have soap powder. So I don't know if I've ever seen soap powder in my life that you wash your clothes with, but you can imagine it, I'm sure. And you have water, and you mix soap powder and water so well and so perfectly that there's no water not permeated with soap, and there's no soap that is dry of water. So it's a perfect blend of water and soap. And if you can imagine that. And the image there is that your mind, your awareness, and the object of your meditation, like breath or the breath or metta, they're so fully interwoven, so finely interwoven, so fully interwoven that you can't separate them out anymore. It's just one experience of unfoldment. Yeah. So that's the first dhyana that the Buddha talks about. So these states of consciousness are really, really to be encouraged. It's very good to work with your hindrances, work with your distractions, and try and let them go so that we can move away from them. So I just want to share one last map, you could say, of the mind in meditation. Sorry, no, there we go. So we could say these are different levels of consciousness that we get into, yeah? So the first one is one we're already well aware of. So this is distracted awareness, yeah? This is where we're in one of the five hindrances. And sadly, we spend much of our lives in this state. Yeah, not all the time, but sadly, we spend much of our lives in this state where we're stuck in a state of craving for sense desire. We're stuck in a state of ill will. We're restless, we're anxious. We don't have any energy available to us in sloth and torpor, or we just are in a state of doubt and indecision where we can't commit to life, we can't commit to anything, yeah? So we're trying to go beyond this state of consciousness, this level of consciousness. The next level of consciousness, which we probably haven't talked about so much so far, is called access concentration. So this is where you're literally starting to access a more concentrated mind. You're starting to access concentration. And this is where you're not fully absorbed just yet, but you're on the way there. And the normal five hindrances have fallen away somewhat. And it's said that when you're in a state like this, it's a bit more enjoyable. Meditation becomes a bit more easy. You can still fall back into distraction and into the first level of consciousness relatively easily if you stop making an appropriate effort. But what you're trying to do is you're trying to you're becoming a bit more stable in your concentration, and it is a bit easier. And in this stage, the normal five hindrances aren't there, but two new hindrances are there. So these are called sinking and drifting. And I'll mention these briefly, but again, you can read more about them in the notes. So sinking is where you start to become a bit more absorbed, but you kind of go a little bit off the boil. You take your foot off the pedal a bit too much or in a certain kind of way, and you start to just drift back into the hindrances again. Yeah, you sink rather, sorry, sink is the word. You sink back into the hindrances again. So when you're experiencing sinking, you need to make a bit more precise effort. Yeah, you need to be a bit more precise about your awareness of the breath, a bit more precise about your experience of metta. So you need to apply yourself a bit more finely. And in access concentration, your effort needs to be a bit more subtle. We'll come back to effort next week, and we're going to look at it next week a bit more when we look at effort and just sitting. But your effort, as you become more absorbed, needs to become more subtle. You can't just brute force it anymore. Yeah. So that's sinking. And then drifting is where you've applied yourself a bit too much, and you can't quite stay on it. And it's almost like another word would be to bounce off it. You try and stay with the breath, but you just drift off it. You bounce off it subtly. So this is what you need to do when you're drifting, when you're moving kind of away, you can't quite stay with the breath, is you need to just refine, relax into it a little bit more, make more subtle effort, ease the strength of your effort. It's not that you don't make effort, but you make a different kind of effort where you're trying to be a bit more receptive to the breath rather than focus on the breath in a more forced way. Yeah. So that's drifting. Yeah. And if you drift too much, you'll just end up back in distraction again, full distraction again. Usually a form of restlessness. Yeah. So that's sinking and drifting in access. There's another one which is sometimes mentioned as well, which is just random thoughts. And when you become more concentrated, you can still just have random thoughts come in. And the key thing is not to get too caught up in it, just let them drift off again. Random thoughts drift, but if you get caught up in them, you'll get back into one of the five distracted hindrances, yeah? So we're moving from distraction into a more concentrated access concentration. And from there, then we move into full absorption. So if you can really work with, so as you become a bit more absorbed, forget about the five hindrances and just focus on sinking or drifting. And if you keep working with those and kind of just trying to really kind of refine your effort more and more, you'll move into full absorption where you feel really fully absorbed in the breath. And that's the word there, the jhanas, yeah? So, but the main thing really is to, wherever you are in your meditation, notice how you need to work, yeah? So you're always going to be in one of these three levels of consciousness in meditation. So are you in full distracted awareness? Well, then you need to work quite directly with the five hindrances. Are you moving into a more a period of more ease in your meditation, which is access concentration? Well, then you need to change your effort a little bit, refine it a little bit more, look out for sinking and drifting. And are you moved into full absorption? And if you're in full absorption, just enjoy it. you can, in theory, in the first dhyana, still have random thoughts come in, but just don't get caught up in them. Often people's experience when they get into dhyana is like, oh wow, I'm in dhyana, and then you knock yourself back out of it. But if the conditions are good, you'll go back into them again soon. And if you're on retreat in particular, it's really good conditions for getting absorbed. Yeah. So if you're in full absorption, just see if you can ease into it, allow it to unfold, really enjoy it. Enjoyment in meditation is usually a very good thing. Yeah. So they're the levels of consciousness. And again, like the 5 hindrances, it's worth being aware of each of these. These are the full map of your meditative mind at an everyday level in meditation. Yeah. So if you've any questions on those, obviously put them in the chat. But I think this is a really important map of consciousness, of the levels of consciousness we get in. I mean, to give you the full perspective of Buddhism, there is another degree of consciousness beyond that, which is the enlightened consciousness. But if you're in that, you don't really need to listen to me anymore, so I haven't put it in there. Okay, so that's pretty much the content. Just to say what the home practice is, and again, we'll have a few minutes at the end if you have any questions. So keep meditating every day, and increase, if you can, the length of your sit. Notice which hindrances you're in and work effectively with them. Notice when you get absorbed and allow that to unfold. Really what I'm saying there is know which of those 3 levels of consciousness you're at and how to work effectively at each one, yeah? And keep a journal, because when you keep a journal, you tend to notice patterns of how your mind works. So you'll notice patterns of hindrances. That's particularly where a journal is useful. You'll notice when you move into absorption and how you fell out of it again, or how you worked or shouldn't have worked or whatever. So a journal really is invaluable. So again, I'd really, really encourage you to commit to using the journal after each sit. Again, if you want to donate, that would be very helpful. And just to remind you again that there will be no class next week. So we'll see you in 2 weeks. So I think it's Wednesday, the 29th of July. We'll see you there. So you have 2 weeks now to practice getting more and more absorbed, or to work more and more effectively with the hindrances. And maybe the last thing to say about the hindrances is that, if the rest of your day you're spending really actively cultivating the hindrances, well, in meditation, you can work with the hindrances, but it's not going to be as good as if you work with them off the cushion. Yeah, so don't forget to work with these levels of consciousness off the cushion as well. There's no reason you can't experience access, concentration, and absorption off the cushion as well. Yeah, so look for beauty, look for situations where you find yourself easily absorbed, and dwell more in those off the cushion as well. Yeah. Okay, so let's have a few minutes for any questions or comments on that, if you have any. And just to remind you again, at the end of the notes, there is more on each of the distractions and how to work with them. Yeah, so a couple of things coming in. So should we do metta or mindfulness? I'd say alternate them this week. Go back to alternating them. Do them guided or solo. I would say to do them more solo. So there are sits on the guided meditation page which just lead you into it and then leave you to have your experience. And I think you have to allow yourself to have your own experience at times. You can't always be just led. So maybe move on to the ones that are less led, or even the ones that are just bells. So someone's asked about repeating the drifting. Drifting is where, in a way, you're making too much effort. It's a kind of a subtle form of restlessness or anxiety in some ways, but you need to just relax into the enjoyment of access, concentration, relax into the more enjoyable experience of the breath, or the more enjoyable experience of metta that you're having. Yeah. And just to say as well, I mean, I used to much more get absorbed in the mindfulness of breathing when I started, but then after a few years, after a period of time, and these days indeed, I find the metta bhavana often much more easy to get absorbed in as well. So it's not going to be one or the other. Okay, thank you for all your appreciative comments coming in, and good to hear, Nuli, you feel like you're making progress. Thanks, Adrian. I'll enjoy my holidays. Jarek, if that's how you pronounce your name, or Yarek, how do you know you get absorbed? Well, if you're really enjoying it, and that's a really good question, by the way. If you're really enjoying it and you find that you're not that distracted, then you're not distracted. You're absorbed. You're either absorbed or you're distracted. You know what I mean? It's kind of as simple as that. So if you are finding that you're not in a hindrance and you're just there and it's unfolding, I mean, you could just be a bit vague, but that in vagueness in itself is a kind of a, you could say it's a kind of distraction. But yeah, give yourself the benefit of the doubt. That's what I was going to say. Give yourself the benefit of the doubt that you are probably more absorbed than you think you are. If you can, don't be always looking for problems. I guess don't be always looking for problems. Yeah. And yes, Sam, I would recommend alternating the mindfulness and metta, or indeed doing both each day. Yeah. Okay, you can keep the questions coming in. It's 1:15 now, so if you need to leave, I know everyone has busy lives. Head on. If you have any more questions, send them in.